Welcome to Upside. I'm Dan Bowyer, and with Mads Jensen, we're both VCs at SuperSeed, where we back early-stage technical founders transforming how the world works.
So we meet every week to unpack what's happening at the intersection of tech, venture, and business in Europe. And so whether you're a founder, investor, or just curious about the forces driving the future, you're in the right place. But just remember, this is not investment advice.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. This episode is brought to you in partnership with 0100 Conferences, which organizes intimate networking events connecting LPs and GPs in private equity and venture capital firms across Europe. A more legitimate setting makes it easier to stand out, get noticed, and leave a lasting impression. Don't miss the opportunity to engage in highly effective networking with investors focused on the DACH region. Their upcoming event, 0100 DACH, will take place in Vienna from February 18th to the 20th at Hotel Savoyen, Vienna. Attendees will include LPs and GPs like Bodelton Capital, Lennartz & Co., KfW Capital, and many more.
Whoa! Thank you!
Save the date. February 18th to the 20th at Hotel Savoyen, Vienna.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
This week, we've got Lomax from Outsized, who is also early stage. He's a deep tech guy, and we were asking pre-recording what's his claim to fame, and he just piped up with a 2:49 marathon time runner, which I think is pretty bloody impressive.
Yeah, stroking my ego. Yeah.
There we go.
Anyway.
Super chap, a family man, all-round good egg, based in Lisbon. Thank you for joining us this week. Lomax, what's been happening with you?
Getting back into the swing of things, actually. I've got 2 term sheets out already, which has been a big start of the year with a bang in dual use, kind of European dynamism. So pretty excited about that.
European dynamism, baby.
Boom.
And gearing up for a big year with Outsized, really. Got a fundraise to go and, up and at 'em.
Well, let's get up and at 'em. Are we still allowed to say Happy New Year? I don't even know anymore, January.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's fine. Yeah.
We're going to go with it. Happy New Year 2025. We're going to start right at the very, very top. Now, this is a bit of a blow for Europe's semiconductor industry. Mads, this is one of yours. What's happening with chips in Europe?
But what's happening is that, the world has woken up to the fact that semiconductors are still really, really important.
Like 50 years later?
50 years later. No, Europe was always had a bit of an industry there. There are some interesting companies. And actually, if you look at the supply chain, ASML and before that size, some of the optics manufacturers, there's some great companies, great technologies in this space. But when it comes to actually making the semis, we've fallen off the perch. We are behind others. And so there's been a concerted effort from around the world, both in the US and also in China, to try and support the industry strategically. And Europe has tried to do the same. But what's happened is that some of those initiatives were not going well. Germany has really been at the center of this European push. Billions of dollars were meant to go into building a number of plants there. And the largest of the investments was meant to be done by Intel. Intel, obviously in deep trouble now, have put the initiative on pause for 2 years, meaning that, it may just never happen. So Europe's chip dependency may now pose an even greater strategic vulnerability to the continent than the previous reliance on Russian gas. There's also a link back to energy, which I'm going to come back to. But first and foremost, it's about a funding gap. So if you look at China, $142 billion being committed to the sector strategically versus only $46 billion in Europe. And that $46 billion European number is a headline number because actually the real cash out of Brussels is only 4 billion euros.
Wow.
And the rest was meant to come from member states. So the idea is you're sort of trying to leverage, kind of put a little bit of European money in and try to leverage the local member states to then crowd in private investment. But when groups like Intel aren't able to step up, the whole house of cards falls apart. So you've had the leverage problem, you've had a coordination problem, and it's not looking very good. Now, there is another issue around energy. Energy costs, they are sort of 5 to 8% of making semiconductors. But for the leading edge, so kind of the 3 nanometers, it can be 10 to 12%. And the challenge in Europe is that our energy cost, going back to the Russian gas, is very, very high. It's at least 2x the US, 3 to 4x China. And so in a not a super high margin industry, I mean, I say that is because we're used to software, but if you think of profitability, 30 to 40%, and you have 10% of your cost base that is 2 to 3x, maybe even 4x more expensive than your competitors, it's just you're at a massive strategic disadvantage. So it's not looking great right now. Lomax mentioned last week that both the German government has fallen apart. They have elections coming up. The French government is wobbling. So who's really taking the leadership on this? So lots of questions right now here at the start of 2025. Some things to unpack for sure.
Mads, do you know what's happening with Intel? Do you know, is this going to be a permanent pullback? Do you know anything behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, there has been Phoenix stories about corporates before, but Gelsing has been fired, right? So new CEO, strategic pivot again. They tried to spend their way out of the problem, which might have been what you'd want to do historically. You're going to get a powerhouse. You got lots of cash. Can you just invest to create the new technology you need? And they were not able to, and he was booted. So they're really soul searching. It was not the best partner.
Lomax, you got anything to chip in here?
No, I think it's just like another example, like, across the whole AI stack, effectively, chips being an important component of that. Like Europe is missing out through underinvestment, through, I think, inertia at the political level. I think there's no real drive from a lot of these governments to invest. The private capital, I talked about it last week about European risk capital not being what it needs to be. All of that kind of adds to the ingredients at the moment that we're falling behind. And, the thing is this is a critical industry. So it's quite hard to crawl your way back, on a kind of 5-10 year lens. So I think, it's all very easy to be like doom and gloom, but it's challenging times for Europe and needs to get a grip.
It feels like, I don't know the timings from breaking ground to, fully functional factory. I'm assuming it's years, unless Elon's involved at all. Obviously, then we'll be doing it in weeks. But
I guess it's what TSMC in the UN, Texas, right? That's been a kind of 2-3 year journey, right? So yeah, that makes about sense. Yeah.
But it also feels like, regardless of when we start, it needs to happen. This kind of desire need isn't going anywhere, so we need to find a way to crack on somehow. At some point is the end point. Right, moving swiftly sideways, a quick check-in with Meta's removal of fact-checking and going back to community notes like X or Twitter-style community notes. This isn't happening in the EU. So Meta have obviously chatted this week, and Mark Zuckerberg has done a video piece saying that they're going to remove fact-checking in the States. And there's been a massive uproar, backlash, all of the mainstream press has gone crazy. Is this a big deal? I mean, Lomax, does this matter? Will this affect anything, do you think?
Well, I think that, this captures like the kind of current zeitgeist, right? So if you think when these things came in 10 years ago, there was a move to, Donald Trump got kicked off some of these platforms, right? There was a move to try and restrict,
he got kicked off of everything, didn't he? I mean, he was he was banned on Facebook, he's banned on X. So
again, restricting free speech and bringing in fact checking, bringing in moderation, being much more proactive about policing and moderating. In a way, we've now come the other way, 10 years, or it's 8 years later, and we've seen it with Twitter, and we've now seen it with Meta moving away from, removing fact checkers, not in the EU, because, I think Zuckerberg would love to do this in the EU too, if you can do it in a compliant way with the Digital Services Act, which is a little bit more of a constraint than that there is in the US. But this is what's happening now. Trump and Musk are in charge in the US. And, there's I think this is a very clear genuflection from Zuckerberg to the new administration. I think it's very, very clear. I mean, I think Zuckerberg has intimated in the past, in previous speeches that, he is a big advocate of free press. I mean, I guess free speech, everyone on the West Coast in tech is generally kind of libertarian and big believers in free speech. But the mood music of the late teens meant that, they were forced by societal pressure to put moderation in. But, society's gone back the other way. We're now in the era of, the strong man. We mentioned last time that, I think now that Trudeau has gone, by the way, that's a new development. I think apart from the start, like everything, all governments in the G7 are starting to lean towards the right, and will be kind of all libertarian or free speech driven, I think. And I think I mentioned there's this chap, Michael Jackson, right, who is a big commentator in Europe, who's just been deplatformed by LinkedIn, right?
He's a fellow VC, and he was deplatformed on LinkedIn for suggesting that he would pay for somebody's mental therapy and accusing people of gang rape apologists. I mean, they were fairly unsavory comments, but in context, I think I understood the vitriol. But he was deplatformed for those comments, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, my take on that is I'm not the biggest fan of Michael Jackson, to be honest. Like, I think he beats a drum, which is kind of good for him, but he beats the kind of very negative European drum. Maybe it achieves a purpose. I feel like there's a lot of trolling that goes on. People love it. It's quite amusing. It's great content. However, much as I don't necessarily love it, I disagree with the deplatforming there,
Yeah, it was really badly. Is he back?
Don't know.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing his back. I did watch, going back to Meta, I did watch Zuckerberg's video because I read all the press, and it's great to pitchfork and get all riled up and angry. Oh my goodness, mis and disinformation. So I thought, let me just watch the actual official release from Meta, and let me try and understand the intent. And it was everything that you would expect. So Zuckerberg comes on, he explains why, and he explains this new push, and he explains back to community notes, X, so it's not going to be automatically fact checked. But one thing that he didn't talk about, which I thought bothered me a little bit, was he didn't talk about working out how to technically solve the problem. It was almost like, can't be solved, so we're going to go back, we're going to change systems. I remember a while ago, there was a British medical journal, there was a BMJ, something posted on Meta by a doctor, and it was fact-checked as incorrect, and the reference to the BMJ portal was put into question, and it was true, and it shouldn't have been removed from the platform. So it does make mistakes. So fact-checking was automatic, did make lots of mistakes. But one thing that Zuckerberg didn't talk about was trying to fix it, or trying to install better systems or better ways of doing it. It was like, no, it doesn't work, so we're just going to move on. It's, well, surely there are ways of improving what we have on the fact-checking side. I don't know the ins and outs of fact-checking Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any other platform. It must be incredibly difficult. But it didn't feel like maybe he couldn't go into it, but it just didn't feel like they were going to make any more effort to make it more accurate or work better. Just thought was just a bit.
He's ripped up the system, and he's basically said, you guys now police yourself in the school grounds, and we all know. I mean, we all know in the school ground that can work, and sometimes it doesn't. There needs to be some kind of oversight, right? I think there's a chance that with the community policing the content, you end up with the loudest or most obnoxious voices, controlling the content, which can be very dangerous, right? So I think watch this space.
I mean, I've stopped using X as much because I just find it such a cesspool. I find it so aggressive and such a cesspool. So I moved over to Blue Sky, which is a little bit demo, wokeist, elitist, echo chamberish. I enjoy it and I love the people, but it's not quite the same without both sides of the equation. I don't mind tuning into people that I disagree with. In fact, I welcome to tune into people that I disagree with. I just don't think we need this level of acerbic, vitriolic, nasty aggression. But maybe I'm just getting old. Mads, what do you reckon? Not on I'm getting old, because that's just true. But yeah,
you 27 and beautiful. Genuine question for the floor. Okay, so we all believe that freedom of speech is incredibly important. It's a foundational part of our societies, of democracy, of a society of liberty, of something really, really positive that we should protect and guard. At the same time, the press we have defamation laws. A newspaper can't just print or say anything they want about somebody for good reason, because you can destroy other people's lives. You can not only destroy their lives, you can do things that might incite others to violence against them and, put their lives at risk and kind of physical bodily harm. And so social media platforms are exempt from defamation laws because of Section 230. And I think that probably made sense when Section 230 was put into place. But when you think about social media platforms today, the challenge is that they've figured out how to hack our human brains. We all function on emotion. And the more emotion we have, the more excited we get about something, the more we engage with it, the more something will be amplified and the more people will see that thing and engage with it. And so that means that, I'm free to pursue defamation of people on these platforms. There's no recourse. I can destroy people's lives. And the more vitriolic I am, the more people will see it and the more it'll blow up.
Rage leads.
It just seems to run counter with the whole notion of why we put defamation laws in place in the first run. And I can't reconcile that in my head. I wonder if you have thought about how we reconcile these two things.
I make it very clear. It's like if we look at some of these platforms as the digital town hall, like the same rules should apply as the town hall or the marketplace.
But they're not the digital town hall, Lomax. It's not. I remember this argument, and I hear this a lot, but when algorithms are amplifying rage and hate, that's not town hall. By very definition,
True.
That's not town hall. So I remember when Elon brought in the sink and let that sink in, and that whole when he just bought Twitter and was like, oh Christ, what a dad joke. But you've got 55 kids, so maybe that's okay. But when he said it's the town, I went, okay, do you know what? I love the fact that you're a free speech absolutist, which he's proven he's not. That's an argument for another day. But I really bought into the argument of the this is the town square. But then you think, hang on a minute, this is not that guy over there on that speaker's corner has got a much bigger megaphone than that guy or girl over there on that speaker. It's just that's not town.
It's highly contrived. I would say that, one thing that is a bit different is in kind of the traditional. So I believe that, the restraints that cut across freedom of speech that the US has and the Europeans have, like that should be applied, the same way in social media as it is applied in everyday life. The caveats or the subject tos or the things to which freedom of expression and free speech is subject to. The one problem, I guess, with defamation is in the context of social media is like it's very hard to accuse something. Everything happens so fast and in real time that actually this person defamed me or this person was libelous at me. I mean, it takes you so long to actually prove that and make a claim for that everyone's forgotten by that point. So, again, like the sort of noisiest person in the room, even if they are defaming and being libelous, their voice tends to win out. I mean, look at all of this Elon Musk stuff with some of the European governments at the moment.
Yeah, but isn't the point with libel laws that, yes, I can, I'm a rich tycoon, I can buy a paper, I can print something nasty that's libelous about someone, I can hit them badly, but they can take me to court and there is some recourse at least. And maybe because of that, I don't want to bankrupt my paper. Whereas today on social media, if I am Elon Musk and I own X, I can say whatever I want and there is no recourse. And he's got a much bigger megaphone than anybody else. Why is he not subject to the same rules that the Telegraph or the Times is?
They should be 100%. And, there are difficulties with like enforcement because all of this is cross-border. So it's like, how the hell do you bring these claims, right? So the problem is it's not a very effective remedy for people being defamed or treated libelously, right? That's one of the main problems, right? And then the news cycle moves on.
Well, Elon talking about, was it Jess Phillips? Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, has had many death threats and all kinds of challenges from Elon suggesting that she's a gang rape apologist or hasn't dealt with the challenges in Rotherham and other English cities of the exploitation of children. So I think you're right, Mads, but I don't know where the line is. Maybe people over a certain magnitude or certain following hit a certain threshold and fall into some kind of other rule structure. Although I guess you don't need that many follows to be picked up and then that to be amplified by somebody who does. I don't know how you'd police it. It's a massive challenge. I mean, maybe will we see more niche platforms? I was speaking to a founder yesterday who is building a challenger to LinkedIn. I know I think it's Zing in we used to be in Germany. There's been a few other kind of business social platforms, but I wonder if we could get, I don't know, a startup community LinkedIn, or if there are other maybe this is an opportunity
social
yeah,
networks.
like vertical platforms. Maybe it's time to unbundle some of these things. Maybe that will remove some of the power. I don't know. I mean, when you have Elon owning X, that's just a massive thing, and Facebook, I guess, is still. I don't know how people have still got Facebook accounts, but that's another question.
I mean, whenever I log into my Facebook account now, which is very rarely, the noise on there is outrageous. Like
I logged into my wife's the other day, and it was
shocking.
It was just sales, marketplace. I said, babe, where are your friends? I mean, when I logged in, I deleted my account 10 years ago. Yeah, you might get an advert interspersed or somebody from a randomer interspersed, but it was basically your friends on your wall. Now it just seems like an eBay threaded marketplace. And mainly of Tut. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's what they're calling it.
I think just a couple of things on that. So one is, I think Elon's behavior is shocking. I was a big Elon. When it comes to business, I'm a big Elon fan. When it comes to all this stuff he's doing now in the media, I'm just shocked by it, quite frankly. I'm like, throwing these grenades in with like half-baked truths, skewed context, going after people who actually, who do have the people's best interests at heart. I think it's shocking. And it's actually putting people in danger. And I think it's irresponsible and reckless. Love the guy as a builder. Really dislike this, decision he's taken and the modus operandi he's adopted about going into, interfering with Europe. Well, it seems like European politics. I mean, obviously, the US too. I think on LinkedIn, I don't know about you guys, by the way, LinkedIn seems to be like, it's this all powerful, all conquering beast at the moment, isn't it? Like, I actually only have one social media at the moment. It's LinkedIn. I'm off Twitter or off X. And I feel like it feels like LinkedIn is like, everyone's using LinkedIn now, isn't it? I mean, I haven't checked the numbers, but
I think there's a slight resentment to it, though. I think there's a slight kind of begrudging use of LinkedIn.
Yeah, true.
Because the platform is pretty ugly and brutal to use at times. And why you've got this bit is LinkedIn and that bit is Sales Navigator and then they've got games and videos and I don't know where they're going to end up. But at the moment, I think you're right. I think it is. I mean, Michael Jackson being deplatformed did remind me that if I want to continue having a voice of any kind, go to Substack or Medium or go elsewhere where you control the platform and the control is yours. So that whole episode has made me think, hang on a second.
But your content is so cuddly and nice. You're never going to get deplatformed by LinkedIn, Dan, are you? I mean, you're a bit controversial at times, but it's
I get slapped. I get slapped quite a lot.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, quite rightly so. I mean, I've had a few community markers. I'm part of the back office crew, and sometimes I'll get a notification from my account manager saying, wagging a finger, or I'll get a community note. I'm not trying to be. I don't mind poking the bear, but I'm not trying to be a prick.
Yeah. Of course.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't suggest to somebody that I would pay for their mental health appraisal or,
Yeah, I mean, that was just very, very, very childish, I thought. For a guy who actually, much as I said, I don't necessarily love the tone of his content, it's actually not bad and it makes a point. And the amount of people that I meet who are tangentially involved in tech who say, oh, do you know Michael Jackson? Is unbelievable. I mean, that happens to me the whole time. And I'm like, yes, I know Michael Jackson. But it was very childish. But I don't think it was, I don't think it merited a full-on deplatforming.
No, I totally agree. Now, Anthropic tripled their valuation in 12 months, looking to, I think they're raising 18. No, they're raising 2.
We're investing in the wrong stuff, guys, aren't we?
We're investing in the wrong country, I think, that's for sure.
Well, I know, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Mads, this is one of yours. So Anthropic, another foundational bunch doing a mega deal. What's the story? What's cooking?
It's a lovely company. As you say, they're raising a couple of bill now to continue.
Just a couple of bill. Just a tidy
couple of bill. Was that between friends? So they've grown to $875 million of annual recurring revenue in 2 years.
And they're not even the ones that everyone knows, right?
No.
This is like, they're what, fifth? Where are they in the pecking order right now?
So it turns out that for folks that build software, so folks that access the LLM via the AI model via API. So I'm building an application. I want to put some AI magic sauce into my app. So I'm calling the API, the application programming interface of somebody else to get the model and ask it, some questions that I want magic AI answers to. Anthropic is actually doing really well. And that's where they have most of their business. They are almost as big as OpenAI, so ChatGPT, when it comes to API use, and they've done extremely well. That's where they've grown. So it's on the back of a B2B model, which I thought was interesting. And there's another interesting aspect of this, which is you've got a company here that now is valued at $60 billion, and they still don't run their own service. Okay,
Really?
they're using somebody else's cloud.
I would love to be their cloud supplier.
Well, so it's all a little bit incestuous because a lot of the money comes from Amazon and Google.
Ah, the circle of life, of course.
The circle of love, that's for sure. And I think it's a really, really smart bet. Actually, as Microsoft were obviously early in there, made a big bet of OpenAI. Business put the money behind Anthropic. And I think he's made a good bet. It's a really, really cool company. Talent, I'd say the third point, talent as a competitive advantage. So the Anthropic guys are ex-OpenAI folks that broke out and set this company up.
But aren't they all a little bit, it just feel a little bit incestuous?
It is a little bit connected. But here's another one for you. So here's the safety paradox. We often talk about Silicon Valley as the place of running fast and breaking things. Actually, Anthropic has been really focused on safety and making the model safe. And yet they've been able to create what many folks argue is the best single pass LLM on the market today very quickly. So just some interesting aspects to that. It's really, really smart execution. Valuation dynamic, we're looking at 69 times recurring revenue. So
what's the SaaS standard? What would it be? 8, 10? What would it be?
Yeah, you're looking at 8, 7 probably for publicly traded companies.
So
now.
that's what we're looking at 69x. That's incredible.
I mean, to the very high level observation, but like one thing that is a bit, we're talking about this AI boom at the moment, and you talk about these valuations and these multiples, you're like, people have lost their heads and this is just another bubble and yada, yada, yada. We've seen this playbook before. But, actually, as Mads has just highlighted, and we know the OpenAI numbers, et cetera, like these companies have real revenue. If you go back through like previous cycles, you go back through even like, you go back to the original .com boom, companies like Webvan or whatever, like all of those companies never had revenue. They just had like, GMV numbers or whatever. Like actually, and, we look back to even like 2021 when we were all investing and, there was definitely a massive disparity between, substance and reality, or, between substance and valuation. But for here, the valuations, you can query the multiples, are actually underpinned by something of substance. Where's the catch? Is it the margin? We talked about in the context of OpenAI. Or what is it? Or maybe there isn't. I suspect there probably is a catch somewhere.
Yeah. I think the catch is how much of this is experimental and how much fidelity is there. So, and I would argue at this stage, I can see how we run our company. I can see how our founders are building businesses. This is no longer just experimental. This is, we are starting to see production workloads or things that are so close to production workloads that there's going to be usage. Now, there is the whole affinity, fidelity. Even if I've developed on Anthropic, am I going to keep using Anthropic, or am I going to switch to OpenAI or to DeepSeek, kind of a free model quickly? And
open source, I think, is the big dark horse.
That's DeepSeek, right? You've got an incredible, you got a GPT-4 style caliber model that's open source.
Here's a question for you both: is 2025
so it's competition?
It's
competition, then, is it? Sorry, Dan.
I think it is. I think there's the competitive piece as we move out of this kind of super push for compute and money and access. But is 2025 going to see the same size raises, the same kind of growth? Do you reckon that 2025 is going to see more of this, or are we kind of peak numbers on the fundraising side of foundational?
Yeah, I don't think we're done yet. I mean, the big thing everybody talks about right now is, where is GPT-5? It's been pushed back and it's been pushed back and it's been more and more expensive. we don't have enough data on the open internet to train the next generation of model. So we have to switch to synthetic data. And there's not a lot of new learning we have to do. Now, I expect that we'll be able to, with the new synthetic data approaches, be able to keep creating models that get better and better and better, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And at some point, you are going to run into, are we ever going to be able to make the money? Are we ever going to be able to make the money back? I don't think the cycle has peaked yet. I think we're going to see more rounds this year, but it's obviously not going to keep growing and growing forever and ever.
So maybe more foundational 25. Anything in there, Lomax? What do you reckon?
No, I think there's still, I think we still keep going. You know, the financial performance like keeps chugging along with in the way that Mads has highlighted in the case of Anthropic. You know, the money's still going to flow in.
Yeah, and obviously Jensen Huang launched Digits this week, the AI supercomputer, and I loved the presentation when he was pretending that it was this big thing. He said, "Oh, if only it was smaller," and then they did this kind of video effect, and he pulled out this tiny little Mac Mini style supercomputer. Mads, what do you know about this? What's happening with Digits and over at NVIDIA?
It's a super cool thing. It's going to be a supercomputer for $3,000. Apple is not very happy about it. They've sort of been pitching stacking Mac Minis to run your models locally, and Jensen Huang has once again presented something that is probably a lot more compelling if you want to run models at home. If you're a developer or a hobbyist, have $3,000 lying around. It's a super compelling thing. I want one. That's all I can say.
What's the deal on the OS? How do you can't just like use it as your daily computer, can you? How do you actually use it? I mean, you're just going to run your models.
I don't think you
can
get it to run Mac OS just yet. I guess you put some Linux
Windows
on it
Vista.
and off you go.
But what's the? I'm just wondering what. I guess the question behind the question was, what is the market size for this? Who wants an AI supercomputer on their desk? Is it the hobbyists? Is it the? I'm trying to work out where this fits in the market. I guess I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
That's every developer.
How would they use it?
If you're developing, if you run, how would you run your open source model?
Well, you'd be using a cloud service, right?
Yeah, but that costs money. And there's latency. If I'm developing something, I want to develop a new API or I develop to an API, and you can just put DeepSeek on my local computer and develop straight there. Much, much better than trying to develop off a cloud server. So no, this is, I think for developers, I think this could be a game changer.
Coming to a desk near Matt soon then.
Yeah, I want one.
I guarantee he'll have one. Just to tinker, just to write some algorithms on a Sunday morning. And more. The other thing that came out of the NVIDIA chat with Jensen Huang was the breakage of Moore's law. Again, Mads, this is one of yours. What's going on with Moore's law? Is it really, what was it, doubling every 2 years, Moore's? Is it no longer doubling every 2 years?
So what's happening is silicon, a semiconductor performance used to be about silicon and semiconductor performance. But what's happening now is because NVIDIA has vertically integrated all the different disciplines, you have this stack multiplication effect where they have the silicon, so that the processors, they have the networking, they have the layered software stack. They've got all these things they're enhancing at the same time in parallel. And this is leading to these dramatic improvements in performance, right? I mean, we started talking about now that the unit of compute is no longer the processor, it's the data center. Because they're building the whole thing, the technology in the for the whole data center. So it's really, really interesting. Now, you've seen this capital concentration where because NVIDIA is so powerful, they can afford to make these bets in all these different disciplines, and they're creating this massive moat because of that. What that leads to is this, productivity inflection where Moore's law is broken, not that we are not improving anymore, but we're improving so fast that the rate of technological change could start to become so big that society no longer is able to absorb the change. This is what we've talked about, right? We all think, look, there's going to be new tech and that will replace that. Some jobs will become redundant. And usually in the past, there's been new jobs cropping up. But if the change happens quickly enough, we won't be able to retrain. I saw Wall Street was talking about, it's kind of the big banks were talking about 200,000 jobs being redundant here just over the next few years. Middle office, back office compliance. So this massive, massive rate of change is going to have some societal implications. And we're going to have to sort of carefully watch the space, I think. But certainly from an NVIDIA perspective, the company just keeps firing on all cylinders.
They're still ruling the world, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yep.
Lomax, did you see Jensen's talk?
Missed it, but can do no wrong at the moment, Jensen. Really can.
No, I think that he's still. I mean, but he's been at it for decades, right? I mean,
it's like another, overnight success story, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. After 30 years of really hard graft and lots of misery. Talking about misery, there was an article this week in the Telegraph about how the British taxpayer is being fleeced by us naughty VCs and startups, and why is so much money being invested by government organizations and advocates into startups and into our world. I found the article very difficult to read from the perspective that so many aspects of it were conflated and missing context. And the main one being that the Future Fund, which was Rishi Sunak's love child out of COVID, the returns aren't, I mean, we're still very, very early days into how these businesses that were invested in from the Future Fund are going to perform. We're still only 2, 3, 4 years in, but the fact that there weren't profits being made and what was government doing investing without any thought as to what it was protecting, the jobs and the livelihoods that it was protecting. And it just didn't feel like a balanced article. It just felt wrong. And I know that coming from a bunch of VCs and investing in startups, and obviously want as many organizations investing in startups as possible, this might sound a little bit self-serving, but we should be getting more activity from more institutions investing in innovation and supporting startups and founders and creating the world that we want to see tomorrow. And this just felt like an extremely skewed, context-free article that just didn't really hit any of the marks that it should. And then I read all the comments on the same Telegraph page, and they're all again pitchforking and waving fists. What is the government doing? This is disgusting. This is not the state of play. So Lomax, this was one of yours. Where did you want to take this conversation?
Well, I think this takes a broader conversation around the role of government in venture, right? It's like at what point does the sort of nurturing hand of the state get withdrawn? I think, like, I was chatting to a GP the other day, and he made a interesting observation when he said, the US has seen, like, let's call it, I mean, he's American, so maybe he was like sort of 60, 70 years of venture cycle. But let's call it 50. Yeah. And Europe has seen like 15, 20 years. Like, it's a much more nascent, not embryonic, but it is a more nascent industry, right? So the US, and it's well publicized, used to have a lot more government involvement at the beginning of the venture capital industry.
It still does. I mean, the SBIR regime, SBIC, I think they're called, they've been around since the 50s, 60s. There is a lot. I know that the ECF scheme, which is one of the British Business Bank's, one of their 8 main initiatives, one of their 8 main products is the ECF, the Enterprise Capital Fund. That came from an American formula off the back of the SBIC scheme in the States. This wasn't something that the British government came up with. They all went over to Washington and spent time. And I spoke to the chaps or some of the team that went over there originally back in the 2010s. No, it must have been earlier than that. So the Americans have been at this for years. I mean, they support their ecosystem. They were big investors in venture in the early 2000s. So I don't think people have the full backstory as to where these schemes came from and how they work. And I've got to say, even if the scheme itself doesn't make money, that doesn't mean that the companies that it has supported over the years aren't making money and supporting livelihoods and jobs and opportunities, and then that's being paid forwards. So I just think we're just seeing this through the wrong lens, and I really rudely interrupted you. I'm so sorry.
No, I didn't know. It's great. It's good flowing conversation. But I would say, like, I think the governments, when they're getting it right, see their job as to catalyze private investment into the space. Ideally, they catalyze private investment. They see results and returns, and the market, becomes more efficient, such that the state can then just withdraw itself. And we've seen that very done nicely with you mentioned the ECF, the Enterprise Capital Fund program in the UK where, you've had a lot of like really good funds emerge from that program, right? That are now fully backed by private capital.
Just one quick thing. To date, Lomax, the British Business Bank is outperforming the market to date. So when you look at the stats, this is not, I mean, you can look at Future Fund and what's going on there as a specific product. And I know that, like most investors, the bank has had a bad couple of years, because most have, but this is patient capital. You can't mark a scorecard on 2 years for a 10-year fund cycle, which tend to be whatever, 10 plus 1 plus 1, or whatever they might be.
I think maybe like stepping. So, but by the way, this is common in all industries, right? Whether it's industrial, manufacturing, shipbuilding, like tons of industries have state aid, right, or government support. Like I do think in Europe we do need to, as an industry, not over rely on government funding, right? I think on a 10, 20, 30-year lens, the industry should be targeting, let's say below 5% of capital from governments. I don't know what the number, the number comes down from 20, 25% to 5. We need to get to a position where this is a fully private market industry led by normal kind of private market dynamics.
Why is that?
It depends on how you as an individual see the role of the state. But I think there is a world in which all of this is dealt with by private citizens, private enterprise. And it depends on what kind of economic model, you ascribe to as an individual. And I think the government's playing a role to catalyze that to happen, particularly as technology is not just a sector, it's everything. Technology percolates and pervades through everything. Governments need to have a strategy to get investment into these sectors, right? And I'm afraid it does mean that government capital needs to flow into it. I actually think investing in funds, I mean, I don't take government money, but, is a smart thing for governments to be doing to try and create
much smarter
investment
than going
managers of the
direct.
future. I think that article, cherry-picked information, that article in the Telegraph, I mean, it's written by the Telegraph, so it's probably automatically very kind of biased against government involvement, right? But the Future Fund, which was actually, governments invested directly in startups in a very unique set of circumstances that, is not a great PR exercise, but it was necessary. I felt necessary at the time. It's actually in what we would call the J curve, right? As fund managers at the moment, isn't it? It's in like year 2 or year 3, right? I don't think
They've had a very small number of implosions. They've had about 20% implosions so far, and not massive ticket implosions. This is not disastrous.
The Future Fund for me is like a bit of an aberration. Like it was COVID was unique, i.e. hopefully people were making decisions over weekends about what they could do to support industries. And, we had like people getting given cash, stimmy checks in the US. You had cash to eat out and go to Pret a Manger or whatever you did in the UK. Like time will tell whether these were
all
good,
you Middle Englanders doing Middle England things in Pret.
But I think like generally like the strategy is more or less right. The execution of it is more or less right. I mean, I know some fund, we know funds that have taken money from a British government to great success, and now they don't have government money, and it's great. But I do think we need to get to a position over 20 years where this is just, we have weaned ourselves off this. And,
see, that's where I disagree with you. And the American initiatives are in perpetuity. So they're ongoing. And that's where I disagree with you. I think there are certain sectors, spaces or strategies that will always need some version of extra support or encouragement. And I think they should continue to be supported with very sensible strategies with the public purse. And I think where possible, they shouldn't go direct. I think where possible, they should fund a match or they should go through fund structures. And that may well sound too self-serving, but then that there's going to be smart skin in the game where, their livelihoods also bank on this success. And you're marrying up to people that are in the field with the skill set to do the job that needs doing.
I was actually chatting to an LP today who runs a government scheme, and he said, the fund investments have been by and large successful, but they actually had a direct program as well. Total disaster.
Makes total sense, though. That makes because it's not their day job, And then you bring
Right.
in some government quangos to go and invest in deep tech X. I mean, how are they going
Yeah.
to manage that process?
The sort of counter, or necessarily the counter to this is, and you've seen a bit of this, in the last 12 months, is like, well, actually, maybe we can supplement or replace the government money with pension money, which is this kind of ongoing thing. And some people have this theory. I think it will take a long time for pension funds to develop the know-how to actually invest in these quite illiquid, quite esoteric, quite strange products that we
But then there will be more fund-to-fund structures to serve, I'm assuming.
True.
That
There will
my
be.
assumption.
That's very true. That's very true.
I mean, I agree with what's been said, just adding in some additional perspectives. So the US is well ahead of Europe in terms of the R&D investment that's being undertaken. It's 3.5% of GDP in the US. It's 2.2% in Europe. And the US GDP is higher. So much, much more money going into R&D. That means you have faster growth on the back of all the tech innovation that we all talk about every week. On top of that, you have 93% of US R&D investment ties back to companies that were venture-backed. Goes to show the role of venture capital in stimulating a growth economy, which is what we all need. From what I can see, you also have a US market where you have more than 3 times as much venture capital as in Europe. So what we need to do in Europe is find ways to stimulate and bring in more VC dollars, euros, pounds into the VC ecosystem so we can build more amazing tech companies that can go and create value and wealth for all of us. And it has to be institutional capital. It can't just be private money. I think, VCTs and EAS, it probably has its place, but that's not going to be the thing that will move the needle on the growth capital we really need.
Well, the US has 8 times more growth capital on average than Europe, I think was the last stat that I read.
Which is interesting because you're like, the market, as Matt said, is 3 to 4 times bigger, but actually at the growth capital stage, the disparity is like immense.
Yes. And so we absolutely need to unlock pension money. We need to reform pension rules and enable pension funds to invest. And I think that's something we have to do regardless. I certainly can't see you withdraw. I think if you withdraw all public money from the venture capital sector in Europe now, the industry will collapse because the institutional capital just isn't there. So I think it's a question of enabling pension funds to invest, supporting them, giving them the right guidelines, setting the right structures in place. You absolutely need the government money there until you have the pension funds up and running. And then, as Dan says, you may still need some of it down the line. I don't know. I think once you get to a certain stage and the industry is mature enough, you can possibly do without it. But at this stage, I just don't see how it works.
No, I think at some point it could be the tax efficient stuff. I think works really well, but there might also be other tax regulation, structural ways that you can keep encouraging private capital that doesn't need, public purse. So maybe there's ways of doing that. And I think the SBIR, I think that's the research side of the American initiative that creates this kind of more liquid effect in the early stage, in the SME and in the startup world. I think that's where that lives. So I think that would be continually useful. But I can't see any time soon that we're not gonna need government support.
And we shouldn't be under any illusions. Like, it's not that the US doesn't, the US isn't putting public money into this. I mean, those grants, the ARPA issue, which is not just, it's not just
the CHIPS Act, IRA. I mean, if you look at all of these initiatives,
they are
unbelievable.
Massive.
Billions and billions of dollars. Yeah.
We know startups that are getting, $25, $50 million in grant, even like relatively early startups. So I think, that's about unheard of in Europe, actually. So there is government, plenty of government interaction there.
Let's pick up the mood in the UK on the UK startup scene and have a chat about Kraken. Lomax, this is one of yours again.
Well, I put this in. Sorry, I put this in not necessarily as like as a sort of startup, because in a way, Kraken is like, kind of spawned out of Octopus Energy, which itself was spawned out of Octopus, investment management platform. In a way, I put it in as a green shoot, an array of light, and they're kind of like, here's a
really
cause.
Is.
I read this. I mean, I've known about Kraken for a while, which just to remind ourselves is the sort of internal operating system that Octopus Energy have developed for themselves, but now they kind of white label under the name Kraken to utilities around the world, in Japan, Australia. And I was, came across this article in the FT this week about Kraken and what a behemoth it's basically become. I think it's servicing like 30, 40 million accounts now, but
60
easily has
million.
line of sight, 60 million now.
Yep.
Easily has line of sight on a billion, which they think is potentially even under ambitious. So, or unambitious. So I think it's potentially a really, really nice success story of something that could be I don't know, 5, 6, 7, maybe billion profit, annual profit product, which is great. It's not a conventional startup, but we sometimes, I think, do ourselves down. Michael Jackson
I think it's a
sometimes
great
gets
story.
to us. And
our inner trolls. We all love a troll. Come on.
Exactly. But actually, there is some good stuff going on. And I'm sure there's some people who've been working on Kraken who will, spin out and be like, oh, well, maybe I'll do my own startup at some point. So, let's not forget that there is, for all the doom and gloom and lack of risk capital, etc., there's good stuff going on.
There is. I mean, Octopus Energy is not even 10 years old. So they're already the largest electricity supplier in the UK. They have a 22% market share. They launched Kraken about 6 years ago. And as you said, it was the internal toolkit that helped manage the electricity supply, which was being disrupted by the renewables play, because Octopus is mainly a renewables provision.
It's intermittent, so yeah.
Yeah, so it was this intermittent challenge. So what needs to go where, when? You need some, really big algorithms to crunch lots of data to work out who's producing, what's coming, and what needs to go. So that's where the platform came from. And then they third party it out. So they enable other providers to use the same platform. And as of the year before last, they made 20 million a profit in that year. For the 22-23, they made 20 million a profit. And that was with 22 million clients. And now 3 times larger, and I have the latest figures.
Yeah, and on track for a lot larger. And Octopus, that sits within the Octopus Energy Group, right? But that's now like, I think, a $9-10 billion company, right? Which has attracted big, I think Calp was invested in Q3, Q4 last year. So like the big Californian pension funds. So, big marquee tier 1, huge institutional capital flowing into that. It's actually, it's a nice light success story that's just sitting there, and it's great to see.
And there's going to be more, I think, on the energy side this year. I know there are more competitors to Kraken coming out now, and there's going to be much more on the energy side coming out this year. In that case, let's move on to the other good news story, which is another one of yours, Lomax, which I think is incredibly important to highlight, which is that we're now back on the unicorn tip. So Europe has seen 13 companies become unicorns, as in 24, not 25, sorry, last year, up from 7 the year before, a long way away from the peak of 69 in 21 and 47, I think, in 22. But what did you want to talk about specifically on this, Lomax?
I just wanted to say, look, I think unicorn numbers are, nearly doubled, still way below the peak, but everything's way below the peak in across general tech, apart from AI. I think when I looked at the list, I think it just kind of, saw the list that got published of the 13 unicorns in 2024 in Europe. What kind of struck me was quite good breadth. Like it was spread reasonably evenly across the continent. Often you see these things concentrated in Nordics, Germany, and UK only.
4 UK. They were all over Benelux. They were all over the place. There's four UK startups out there.
So like I would say, and I also say also quite broad from a sectoral perspective. They were
all over the place. I expected all AI.
Europe has done fintech. Europe has done fintech really well. And it's actually, it's not all like, oh, we've just got a bunch of UK, Nordic and German fintech companies here. We've actually got reasonable breadth here. So I think it was just a nice little, heartwarming kind of, when we stick our heads up, from the day to day,
from the doom,
there's some good
the
stuff
European
going on. There's
doom.
More and more mega rounds now. There are these $100 million rounds. I mean, Poolside is an absolute monster of a company in terms of fundraising, right?
They're over in the States now, right? Poolside have they gone?
Poolside, yeah. But very much, very, very, very much, at least 50% of the founding team are European and probably a core part of it. So there's a lot of European DNA in it.
I love the bending spoons. Now they do the mobile apps they do a creative suite mobile apps, and they bootstrap for 6 years. Now are $2.6 billion valuation, $2.6 billion valuation. They've raised $600 million to date. They bootstrapped for the first 6 years working out their craft. And then they grew through acquisition. So they bought Brightcove, StreamYard, Issue, and a bunch of other platforms.
Evernote.
And acquired their So I thought that was just a really, really smart way as the world was turning.
It's funny you say that. I almost don't count. I mean, those guys are clearly amazing entrepreneurs and they built a ton of value. But I'm always like, bending spinach is because it's a bit of a roller. I'd sort of like seen it less as maybe it slightly diminished it in my eyes as a.
Really, I went the other way. I thought it was such a smart growth strategy. As some founders have, absolutely spent and want to get out and the world has turned, go on a little buying spree and build. I mean, it's very hard to do, buying and then creating the right ecosystem. I imagine must be a really difficult thing to do, but they're obviously doing well and raised a bunch of money.
Well, and it's a good reminder that, how do you grow a company? You grow it organically and inorganically, right? And inorganically is M&A and acquisition, and it's a key skill set for building businesses, right? And so, you do it well. Impressive things can result from that.
I thought we would see more of it, but this AI recovery or this kind of AI resurgence and it feels like we didn't have enough of a downturn to see more of that M&A activity as my kind of, I thought we would have a few more years in the doldrums where we'd see a lot more of this happening. Mads, anything to add on the bending spoons or unicorns or European goodness?
I think it's wonderful. I think it's thought-provoking that as of today, there are still more Germans that have built unicorns in Silicon Valley than there are Germans having built unicorns in Germany. And I think it's on us on this call and everybody in our ecosystem to create the best possible conditions for founders, amazing founders, to build great companies here in Europe. So that's my mission for 25.
Let's do it. I want to talk about VC now, and I want to be very navel-gazing and inward-looking and have a think about what is happening in our industry. And at a top level, do you see a world where we could have pure quant VC, where VC is all AI, all platform, and humans are not required? Or the other end of the spectrum, AI is never going to touch the industry, which is not true already, but play with me. And it's going to be all probably middle-aged white dudes making the call and investing in startups and doing what we do. Because I'm quite bullish on AI and automating what we do. Lomax, what are you using currently? How much of your process is AI tooled? Where are you at?
We do a lot of pre-seed investing, so I still kind of call me old school, and maybe and I turned 40 recently, so maybe I'm way over the hill now. I still find that part of maybe this is me trying to justify my management fee, right? But it's like I feel like part of what we do is still, there's a craft of what we do, and there's a kind of artisanal aspect and a very human aspect to what we do. We look at investments and we're like, can we get 100x on this investment, right? And you can chuck a ton of data at that, and you can chuck, you can either get an analyst at it, or you can get an agent doing a bunch of work for you on it now. I'm just like, I'm yet to see anything that will substitute the kind of feeling that we get that when we meet. I don't know about you guys, but when I meet founders that I think is 100x opportunity, I get this kind of slightly tingling feeling and something that I don't think software at the moment can replicate.
But you're assuming that fizz is a good fizz.
Yeah, I mean, most of it's going to be wrong most of the time, obviously. But it doesn't matter. You just need to be right once, right?
Could data's fizz be more accurate than the human fizz? Is the question.
Yeah.
I think it can be, for the record. I think there is a strong argument for quant VC.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a huge look. I mean, you look at what quant has done in hedge funds with Millennium, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I mean, this is private markets. It's a bit different, and it's much more people centric. But for sure.
So I was speaking to Andre Reterath from Datastream VC, and he did a little poll recently. So 75% of the 92 VCs polled believe that AI and humans will coexist. So that's the co-pilot. So the vast majority of the existing VC cohort believe that it'll be a co-pilot effort. They won't lose that many of their team. They won't hire many more of their team. It'll be fairly stock standard stasis, but it'll be co-piloted. And 10%, but a growing cohort, very small but growing cohort, think it's going to be a quant approach. But Mads, where do you think the industry will land using AI to source, select, support, do due diligence, do reporting, manage the fund? Where do you think we'll land?
I think it depends on the answer to another question, which is what do we believe will happen with AI and business and just the way we run the world in the future? If AI becomes so smart that it can replace humans in all aspects, well, we're not going to have startups anymore. I mean, it's because AI is just going to do whatever they're going to do, right? The people owning the AI is going to have infinite wealth accruing to them. And yeah, that's a plausible future. I don't think it'll be that simple, but it's plausible. So that's kind of one end of your spectrum. If that's the future, we're not going to need VCs. What are we going to allocate to? There are no startups. We don't need startups because the algorithms are just going to figure out how to make whatever it is we want to make. Now, if we think there will be startups, that there will be humans setting out to take on endeavors, we're going to have to find a way to assess which ones are worthy of backing. And the question then becomes, can we reduce the probability of success to an algorithm that you could have that algorithm assess these startup ideas, business plans, and teams, and on the basis of that, say, you deserve capital and you don't. So far, we haven't figured that out. I mean, lots of studies have been done, and it's very hard to find a surefire way of saying this startup's going to work and that one isn't algorithmically. We know that. So then there's lots of other work that you're doing as a VC, right? You're screening decks, you're replying to emails, you're writing reports. Yeah, of course, all that stuff we're already automating a lot of today, and we're going to automate more and more of. But if we think so meeting founders, assessing founders, and selecting who to work with is going to be an important piece of work in the future, then I think we're probably some ways away from being able to just reduce that to an algorithm, kind of that human assessment. Then there is what happens once you've invested. We know how bloody hard it is to build a company. And I know that such a big part of my week is working with founders, supporting founders, discussing strategy with founders, being a shoulder to lean on or cry on when things don't work out. I'm not sure the algorithm's going to be great at that either. So I do think there is a role for all this human interaction we have today, both in terms of figuring out who to partner with and then supporting them on the human level once we partnered. But all the stuff that sits around it, yes, absolutely, we're gonna automate that.
I think this does lead in one direction, which is my assumption is that the sourcing and the connecting side, they're going to be the first problem solved in our world, which means that it'll be much quicker for founder and funder to connect in a more meaningful way, which will mean that it'll be harder for VCs to differentiate when they don't have that same sourcing challenge, which means that VCs will be pushed harder to really prove value to founders. So that's my assumption, is that there'll be a massive brand play in our space where we as a community will be pushed more to show who we are, what we do, how we support, how we don't support, and there'll be a transparency that will be required and a brand play that will be required as this founder funder. I mean, at the moment it takes 6 months to go and do your first and second fundraise or whatever it might be. That's just nuts. If you're full-time fundraising as a founder rather than focusing on your business, I think that's too distracting.
Just challenging that for a second. How many times do we see founders setting out with an idea, wanting to go and raise money for it, actually being, as you like to say, punched in the face a lot, learning, iterating, taking on board, developing the idea, and then the thing that ends up raising money at the end is a different version
totally
than the one they started out with.
And there's so much baked into what you're saying because it helps them work out what sales is. It helps them understand how to articulate their purpose, their position, their vision, what they're going to achieve, how to talk about their client. It's actually an incredibly important process. But my overarching feeling is that it shouldn't be that difficult. You shouldn't have 100 meetings to one offer. It shouldn't take 6 months. So I'm not sure where the optimal punching in the face period of time is, but it's not what it is now. I feel quite comfortable that it's not what it is currently, but I do believe that as more VCs and angels and other investors, family offices, or whoever they may be, as their access to more of the right types of offering for their strategy, as that connective tissue is created, we are going to be forced as a community to be able to position ourselves better and to talk about what we do and what we don't do in a much more clear way, because the connective tissue is going to be slicker, and it needs to be. It really does. But I'm not saying or suggesting that you're wrong. I think it's very important for the fundraising process itself to create the right dynamic for the founder and that whole sales energy. I think that's absolutely right. Well, my loves, that is it. It has been the week ending. What will it be on Sunday? It'll be the 12th. It has been lovely chatting with you. Before we go, anything you want to add, Lomax?
Nearly halfway there already through January, no?
Oh, I thought you were going to say nearly halfway. Only 350 days till Christmas, boys. It's be fine.
Yeah. No. It's just like we're cracking on through, you know? Got to keep going.
And it's going to go quick. Mads, any last words from you?
Lovely seeing you both. Have a great weekend.
Always awesome. Catch you next week, dudes.
Great to see you guys.
Here's a few words from our beloved sponsor. This episode is brought to you in partnership with 0100 Conferences, which organizes intimate networking events connecting LPs and GPs in private equity and venture capital firms across Europe. A more legitimate setting makes it easier to stand out, get noticed, and leave a lasting impression. Don't miss the opportunity to engage in highly effective networking with investors focused on the DACH region. Their upcoming event, 0100 DACH, will take place in Vienna from February 18th to the 20th at Hotel Savoy in Vienna. Attendees will include LPs and GPs like Boulderton Capital, Leonards & Co., KFW Capital, and many more.
Whoa! Thank you.
Save the date. February 18th to the 20th at Hotel Savoy in Vienna.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.